Welcome. My name is William Messakar. I am a master model railroader in the 4th Division of the Pacific Northwest region of the National Model Railroad Association. I want to welcome all of you to the virtual layout tour we'll have presented today by members of the NMRA. We would encourage you to find out about the NMRA and join in order to participate in these virtual tours. We have other virtual clinics and other activities for the National Model Railroad Association that we think you'll find a big help to your modeling, and you'll get to meet model railroaders just like you. So welcome to our tour, and I hope you enjoy it.
As Burr said, I'm going to be talking about my layout this morning, the Great Northern's Cascade division in HO, and I've been working on this probably now almost 20 years. This is an abridged version. It's meant to run about 30 minutes. And the unabridged version of this presentation, that will be posted on the YouTube channel that Burr just mentioned. My layout was also featured in Model Railroader in the June 2020 issue, and there are a couple of videos that are on Model Railroader's website and their YouTube channel. So with that, today I'm going to just walk through the concept of the layout, talk a bit about trains and routing, go through construction of the layout, the staging, which is beneath the hardshell. This is a hardshell layout. And there's the Underworld, again, the staging, a trestle that is one of the linear design elements of the layout, and then catenary that we've put on the layout. Then we'll walk through some selected photos. All the photos in the selected section and some of the other photos are done with Helicon focus to improve depth of fields. And then finally, we'll wrap up with lessons learned and what's next. So layout design always starts with this, John Armstrong called them givens and druthers. And I've got a few constraints on top here. But the idea when I started is I wanted a mountain prototype. I wanted mainline train operation and primarily freight. At the time, passenger was more of a druther. Now it's a given. And I wanted some branch line operations. And the linear design elements, to use that term, that I've chosen are a yard and engine service area. It's Everett and Delta Yard here in Washington. And the layout probably scenically would fit more with Skykomish, but just due to compression and the fact that Everett is much more interesting from an operational perspective, I chose it. Got this large canyon and trestle that I wanted to build. I wanted sort of this floor to ceiling scenery a la John Allen. He had always influenced me as a kid, reading stories about his layout. And then I wanted this mountain segment. Now the constraints in the room was, the first one was I had a long skinny room that had about 35 feet to work with from the door, and then about 13 and a half feet across the room. And then I had this wood stove with a brick pad that it rests on that was about 6.5 feet across here. And we use this for emergency heat when we lose power out here in East King County. So I kept that in the room. But then with those constraints, the layout shape is this L-shape affair as shown here in the shaded area. And this dimension right through here led to a minimum radius of 24 inches. This is why I started out thinking I wasn't going to use passenger operation, but I've since figured out how to get around that. Now, James Hill, who pushed the Great Northern out here, had this concept for this revenue traffic called the Rake. And the head of the Rake was his Vancouver, BC, down to Portland, through Seattle, trackage rights below Seattle, and then eventually connection into California. This was the head of the Rake, and the transcontinental line was the handle of the Rake. So Everett is the place where the handle joins the head. There are also trackage rights, a lot of operation in Everett, the Northern Pacific, and Milwaukee. So Everett was a natural really for this layout design. This is an overview of the room and the layout looking from one end. I'll show you a track plan here in the next slide. This shows the wood stove, the raised brick area, and because it's a tripping hazard, I had to have enough room through here for people to walk. But you can get a sense of the size of the layout. It's really a modest kind of size layout. the track plan that was published in Model Railroader in June is here. You can see on the ends there's a helix, a Stevens Pass helix, which was in the blob that we were just looking at. And then on the far end, Chumstick helix. And these connect the lower level to an upper level. The lower level's at 51 inches off the floor, and this upper mountain segment is 59 inches off the floor, this passing track. Then you can see the trestle, and this is the really vertical scenery portion of the layout. And then Everett with the passenger depot, Delta Yard, and engine service facilities. And then on the lower level underneath is staging. I've got a long 5-track staging yard and 2 3-track staging yards beneath the hardshell. This was the advantage of the hardshell, was all the space that is beneath it. So I'll walk down through some photos now just to give you a sense of the layout, what it looks like. This is the Alpine Creek Canyon area. You can see how low the layout goes here and how high back in this area. And this really shows off some of the trees, which are a great feature of the layout done by Canyon Creek Scenics. And we've got really tall trees toward the front of the layout. This tree right here is about 20 inches high. And then back at the upper level, very small trees. These are 2 inches tall, made out of toothpicks. So this forces the perspective, really helps give a good feel and a good northwest feel to the layout. This is a shot looking down the trackage into Everett with the passenger depot on the left, Delta Yard on the right, and the engine service facilities at the far end. And then this is the wall at the far end of the room. This photo shows the engine service area with this 6-stall roundhouse. Turned around at an odd angle, but it works really nicely. And you have to obviously use the turntable to get into it, as you always do, but just seems the roundhouse is backwards from the way it's normally sited. This is a 130-foot turntable, allows me to turn the longest steam locomotives I've got on the layout. And then some water and oil facilities and oil and sand in the foreground here. Then this shot looks back the opposite direction from an aisle behind the layout, looking over again the engine service area, Delta Yard, and the trackage along the foreground here. And then you can see the upper level of the passing track and the upper level of the mountain segment here. So let's talk about trains and routing. Back to this Rake analogy, and we're in Everett, so looking at routing trains either from St. Paul through Everett to Seattle, or Vancouver down through Seattle, or locals running in this area. So the trains that I run are the passenger. You've already seen the Fast Mail. Got an Empire Builder and Oriental Limited, and I run the 1947 version of the Empire Builder. So this is the first streamlined version. When they initiated that, the old consist went to the Oriental Limited, and these 2 trains ran between 47 and 51. So that sets, I picked the era 1950 for my layout. Now I run through freights, so I've got manifest freights that come from St. Paul to Seattle and back, fruit extras that run from Eastern Washington through Seattle, north and south, and then the GWS and the SWIG, which ran from Vancouver to LA via the Great Northern, the Western Pacific, and Santa Fe, and hence the initials here. And then several locals that both for the GN up to Bellingham, the Skykomish Valley, and Northern Pacific locals, the Darrington Logger, trains 675, 676 from Auburn up to Sumas and Milwaukee. So the routing for the trains looks like this. This would be in staging. So say we're running a train from St. Paul to Seattle. Starts here in staging, comes out, goes up the Chumstick Helix along the mountain segment into the Cascade Tunnel and that helix, and then back through Everett and around to Seattle via the bottom of this Chumstick Helix and back into staging. And similarly, if we were running a train from Seattle, say, to Vancouver, come out of staging, now that train comes around the bottom of the Chumstick Helix and out through Everett, around the Cascade Helix, back through Delta Yard, through Delta Y and into staging. So this shows kind of the staging of I call this sort of a British concept where everything's about moving trains in and through Everett and Delta Yard. So now let's just step through some of the construction. So as I indicated, it's hardshell construction built on L girder base and then wood framed structure above with aluminum wire and then plaster cloth over that, and then sort of a soupy plaster to thicken that and strengthen it. So you can see a cross section here and how much space is beneath the hardshell. So that's what I made use of for staging. And then these two pieces right here, each lift out sections that provide access to the track at the top. So these can be lifted up and put out of the way so you can get to that upper area. And as I go through the presentation, got this little key plan at the bottom that shows which direction we're looking on the layout, the L shape. Painting the backdrop, it's set in 1950 and it's set in late spring, early summer. January, maybe to be precise. This was a set of photos taken up north of the GN line. This is up the Index Galena Road at Benchmark Mountain. And you see snow still in the high country in June. And so this is what I think really gives a nice northwest feel for the layout. This is Spire Mountain right here in this photo. You can see me painting this on the hardboard here. There's Spire Mountain, the beginnings of it. Painted the white first and then worked to the darker colors in more detail. And then this is the final product. It works pretty well, I think, and gives a feel that there's some distance to the layout because the mountains are not as imposing as they would be if you were looking right from their base. And this is all done with just acrylic paints and then through these hatches that I built for access. Underneath in the staging, this gives you a sense of that 5-track staging area. This is looking down staging from one end from one of the access areas, and then a 3-track staging yard off to the left here. This was actually built after the hardshell was in place, and I realized just how much volume was under the layout and how much you can never have enough staging. So I was able to stuff this under the hardshell. Then the photo at the lower right is just looking down the other direction of the staging yard. And then you can see one of the closed circuit TV cameras. There are 4 cameras, and those are fed to a monitor at the front of the layout, so I can see what's going on underneath the layout. This shows the construction of chumstick helix with 2x2 verticals. There are 8 of them that hold the helix up. And there was an interesting article about constructing helices in MRA this month. And it looked like it took 2 tries to do it. This is my second try. My first helix, I had to go back and do some retrofit. One of the things I'll point out is if you'll notice this little angle bracket, it's angled to be perpendicular to the grade of the track. And when I built the first one, I had this vertical, and when I tightened the screws, I got a nice little wiggle in the track, which was a problem. I also use 1/2-inch plywood, and then this clear plexiglass on the outside acts to stiffen it and to keep trains from going off the outside. I've never had trains go off, derail, and hit that plexiglass or string line and go off the inside either. But there's access to these, both the helices, so you can get into service and re-rail things. This is a slide showing the access. You can see the 2 helices here. So we were just looking at this one, Chumstick, and has the same access in Stevens Pass. We've got several access hatches. You can see me standing in one of these to take a photo of a train on the upper level. There's a little duck under and an aisle behind the layout in this portion. And that gives me access to this bit of track here. This is where the lift out sections are that I showed you. And then there is an aisle that you can walk behind to get to everything that's in this back area. These are those lift out sections from the backside after the hardshell and the scenery has been built. So the trestle that I built as one of the features of the layout, the beginnings of it is shown here. And this trestle has been in continuous operation since I built the bench work. Had the lower level operational. You see this plywood, 1x3 support, and that set the profile grade line and the alignment of the track work. And then as I built these microengineering towers and girders, I built a girder tower pair and would cut the existing wood back and install that pair and just progress my way along here. And this trestle was in continual operation as I built the trestle. The trestle's also built from the top down and built to the ground contour. So the base is very uneven. There's no one plinth that's at the same elevation. And you see this in actual trestles in some of the really rugged mountain areas. And very few people modeled this. It required a lot of kit bashing of these towers, but it worked out very nicely in the end. And if you want to see more detail of how this was done, you'd look at the unabridged version of the presentation. This is what the final product looked like after I got the holes through the layout plugged up and got the ground cover, scree, and then Canyon Creek's trees here really make this pop. You can see these, this is probably an 18-inch, 20-inch tall tree, dug fir, where the needles are gone from the lower limbs, looks very northwestern. And then the small trees in the far distance here, maybe 5 feet away from the camera at this point, and multiple trunk trees, a tree that got struck by lightning and burned. This is a lot of variety that Pete and Barb do for their trees. Then the catenary construction, obviously modeling the electrified portion of GN's crossing of the Cascade Mountains. And this is what their catenary looked like from a publication in the Westinghouse put together in 1929 when the electrification was built. You see this real characteristic two-circuit arrangement at the top of one of the poles, and then the cross arms here and the messenger wire. And so I was trying to scratch build these, and it was turning out okay, but not great. And a friend of mine, Mike Dubinsky, said, why don't we try to 3D print those? So we found some models, some geometry of the insulators, and scaled off dimensions from photos of that were taken in Skykomish. And this is the product of the 3D pole. And then this is what it looks like when it comes to us raw. You paint this and then add either this diagonal braced single track catenary, or the pole could support catenary for multiple tracks. And we will look at how that is arranged in this photo. Here's one of those single track applications. And I don't model the wire itself. In reality, in photos, when the wire is against a landscape, you can hardly see it. When it's against the sky, it's very clear. But modeling it was beyond what I wanted to get into, just wasn't my cup of tea. But this shows the dual track arrangement where you've got the pole with the two circuits and then just a simple pole on the other side holding the catenary. So it turned out pretty well, I think. And now to finish up the presentation, we'll go through some photos, selected photos that were taken along the layout. I'll work along the top of the layout first and then the lower level. And these were all taken with Helicon focus, where you stack various photos together, have different focal lengths, and then the computer program integrates them. So this is that curve up at the end of the layout. These are rubber rocks by Cripplebush, which this comes already painted like this. Is just hot glue it up to the hard shell and I was done. And then we're looking back to the corner of the room where I've got a coved backdrop, and you can hardly tell you're looking at the corner. But this turned out to be a nice photo of train 402 headed eastbound with the Y1 electrics. This is looking at its counterpart, train 401 going westbound, that same curve area, corner up here. I try to add a lot of detail to the ground cover. So scree, different types and colors of ground foam, smaller trees. Some of these trees are K&S trees, and I think they're out of business right now. The trees in the foreground are canyon creeks. This is one that Pete did, a custom tree from a photo of an actual tree out near where I live on Tiger Mountain. Moving along, this is pre-Catenary, looking back toward that same corner along the top level. And this photo was published in Model Railroader in their trackside photos in June 2017. And this is a photo, I do a lot of this. I got an idea from a Trains article in 1958 that Phil Hastings, a photographer, and David Morgan wrote the article, but they rode this train over Donner Pass, and Phil was taking photos out of the caboose cupola and photos of passing trains. So that's what inspired me to take this photo. And the interesting thing is this is a transfer caboose with no cupola. So it allowed me to get the camera right up behind the caboose where it looks like you're looking out of the cupola roughly. The geometry's hard to maintain, but it works well. You can see shows how Helicon really shines. You can see rivets on the roof walk here, all the way back to, you can read the Western Fruit Express on the boxcars in the distance. This photo is at the other end of the upper level and is a replication of the first passing of the Empire Builder after electrification in 1929, first run through Stevens Pass Tunnel. These green Y1s, heater car, RPO. Here's one of the local trains, the Darrington Logger, passing Delta Y. Now we're down on the lower level. So looking at this engine service terminal, looking through the roundhouse and locomotive on the turntable. But the Darrington Logger, in some cases in these NP trains, you can see photos where they've got this less than carload car that they're also including in the consist. So it's kind of a fun consist to run. And again, the trees really make this have a northwest flare. This is the GWS coming from Vancouver down through Delta Y. And Delta Y, there's a tunnel here just out of sight. You can just see the portal here. So the train's coiling around into Delta Yard. This is a set of Stewart FTs that Ray Wheeler custom painted. They're very nice and are probably one of my go-to locomotive sets on the layout. And I didn't mention this earlier, but the steamers that I'm running, they're confined to the lower level. They cannot pull anything up those helices. So diesels, multiple units, all these are powered. I put in the power packs of the B units. And then the electric motors, those are all brass, but they run in multiple unit consist and can pull a nice train up the helix. Here's another photo of sort of a replication of a photo that GN took in Skycoma showing an R2 steamer. And they had an FT, I've got this F3, and then a Y1. So you've got steam, diesel, and electric. I think Craig Thorpe actually painted that photo and it's used as the jacket painting or illustration for the second edition of Lines West. One interesting fact here is, if you're a GN fan, you probably know this, but you wonder, did these ever run together? And during World War II, all three, electric, diesel, and steam, could be seen operating in one train. It was only during the wartime that was done, but it has been done. Then before we get to the trestle through sort of a wooded section, here's another Canyon Creek Scenics. Custom tree was made off of a photo of a tree here that is really just a beat up old crusty tree. I call this graybeard. But you can see the complexity of the landform, the scenery with the scree, the trees fit really nicely. And I just love these orange-sided plywood boxcars. The colors really make things pop. To the trestle. There's a trio of Y1s that are pulling a train up towards Stevens Pass. There's no catenary down here yet. That's a to-do on my list. You can see just a different view of the trestle. And then Class R2, again, this 2882 running full throttle. This is going around, this outside the helix. Helix is just behind this hard shell on the very end of the layout. This is roughly a 24-inch radius, and you would think, well, that's just sacrilege to run that big R2 around that curve. But if you get the right angle with the photograph, it doesn't look too bad. Well, it's a sharp turn, but I thought it turned out pretty well. And I photoshopped in some exhaust here, give it a little action feel. And then the wood stove that I started with is right behind this blue. It's actually a piece of masonite that I paint blue that I can put up to block out the room so I can take a photo and get rid of the clutter without having to try to do that in Photoshop, which is super tedious. And then here's another interesting thing of these dead trees. So the concept here is that I've got a flooded area, kind of a wetland area that the construction of the right-of-way caused to occur. And when that happens, typically you would kill trees. So again, I've seen this in reality. You see these areas with a bunch of dead trees that have water around their roots. And so that's the concept here. So that is the tour of the layout, and I'll wrap up here with just lessons learned and what's next. Lessons learned, obviously, broader curves would be fantastic. It didn't work out in this case, and you can work around them. Again, you go to the unabridged version, see how I can modify brass passenger cars to run on 24-inch radii and not look bad, because you can't tell that there's any modification from looking at them from the side. Following standards improves operation. I was meticulous about things as I went along. As I said, I learned some lessons on the helix. When I went to the second helix, I was actually calculating the elevation in millimeters as I went up to have things very consistent, have a nice vertical curve going into the helix so I didn't have derailment problems. And this third lesson is just jump in and try stuff. If it doesn't work out, you can rework things. And I've done some rework, but because of following standards, and thanks to NMRA, I didn't have to do much rework. So what's next? I'm still developing the operational scheme here as I'm learning from all of you guys that I've met here since joining NMRA. I want to add signaling to the layout. Still got that to go. Catenary will eventually come into Everett, and I'm just combining Everett and Skycomers. That's part of the selective compression here, but I think that makes some sense. And then layout expansion. It's L-shaped now. Maybe I get some real estate acquisition along the west wall of the room, and I can expand down to Seattle. So we'll see. And with that, I will thank you. And I will draw your attention to this photo at the bottom. It was screened in the first slide. And this is a little more detailed photo, again, with Helicon. But anyway, thank you. And I'm happy to have given you this presentation today.
Thank you again, Lee. And
thank you.
Again, I encourage all of you to watch both this abridged version and the longer version on our YouTube site, 4D PNR.
Hello again. This is another reminder that this virtual layout tour has been brought to you by members of the 4th Division of the Pacific Northwest region of the National Model Railroad Association. And we hope you've enjoyed it. And we want to encourage you to, again, find out about the NMRA online. Both PNR and NMRA have an excellent website where you can get information about joining and participating in this and other activities like our clinics that are held all over the region. So thank you for joining us today and wish you great modeling.